Hello, welcome back to Kaely Daily. Today's question is, when should I get an epidural?
This is Kaely Daily, the bi-weekly podcast about all things doula tips and tits, where we answer one question about pregnancy, labor, postpartum, or lactation in order to have your journey in this parenting world be just a little bit more informed and filled with consent.
Hello and welcome back. I'm Kaely Harrod, the host of Kaely Daily, the creator of the Birth Prep Blueprint, which is an inclusive, comprehensive childbirth education that is completely online. So completely self-paced. You do it at your own pace. Start whenever you'd like. It makes it a perfect class for busy families or for families who are just feeling a little bit nervous about COVID and don't want to be around folks. It is all taught and designed by me. And you have tons of great resources in the midst of it. So that is the program that sponsors this lovely podcast, Kaely Daily, Doula Tips and Tits. So that's how you get all these awesome answers. Okay. So today's question is, when should I get an epidural? And you might be seeing that I have a little mini series on when questions. So this is continuing that. The answer to this question is it depends. Surprise, surprise, right? Because I don't ever answer questions like that. That's ridiculous. So there is no perfect time. That is my official response. However, there's some nuance here. So a few things to think about are, one, you want to actually be in labor. What do I mean when I say that? Okay, well, if you're having an induction, for instance, a medical induction, then you want to be actually in labor. And that means you're on in most cases, right? Because you're at like 1 centimeter, or when they're not even having contractions, and then their body struggles to actually get into labor with the loss of feeling, the loss of movement, etc., that an epidural brings. There are some other IV pain medications for the earlier stages of an induction. If you're needing something like that, that is not today's question. So yes, that's one thing to consider. The other thing is, when do you feel like you need it, right? I think when we talk about pain medication in labor, we often talk about ability, like can I, or how long will I be able to do labor, etc. I don't know that that's entirely helpful, because it makes it sort of that you're proving something to yourself, and you can then sometimes be suffering in a way that's incredibly unnecessary for the sake of proving something, right? And so that, I think, is unhelpful. The reason I bring that up is that I've occasionally seen where someone has a specific metric in their mind, typically a dilation. So I've had clients say, like, I want to make it to 6 centimeters or 7 centimeters or something like that. And what that assumes is that until 6 or 7 centimeters, you're going to be like coping really well. Your labor is not going to be really super long. You're not going to have any kind of complications, right? And so then if that's your goal and you're at 5 centimeters and it's taken you like 30 hours to get there, then you're delaying the relief that you feel like you need for no reason, basically, right? Like for kind of an arbitrary reason. Because really, logistically speaking, 5 to 7 centimeters, there's not much difference in terms of getting an epidural, right? Now, it's easier to get an epidural probably at 5 centimeters than 7 centimeters based on like the intensity of your contractions and how close together they are and things like that. But in terms of statistics and data around an epidural doing something to your labor at 5 centimeters that it's not going to do to your labor at 7 centimeters, not important, not statistically significant, right? So I will say, generally speaking, you want to be in labor, and ideally you want to aim to be in active labor. Now, most hospitals, which is the place where you would get an epidural, right, will not admit someone before 3 to 4 centimeters. Now, that is not always the case, right? It depends a little bit on where you live, what the policies are at your facility. In the DC area where I work and I'm a doula, lots of the hospitals want you to be 3 or 4 centimeters. That means you can't be admitted before that, which means you can't get an epidural before that unless you're having an induction, right? So usually you will already be far enough along to ask for an epidural if you want one. Now, one little bonus piece of info that is not specifically answering the question of when should I get an epidural, but is, I think, helpful to know if you're weighing whether or not you want an epidural in the midst of labor. If you are in a labor setting and you haven't yet been hooked to any kind of IV fluids, you are usually going to be required to have some kind of IV fluids before an epidural is given to you. The reason for that is that an epidural's most common side effect is a drop in blood pressure for the person who receives the epidural, so the person who's in labor, right? That means that if they give you fluid before they give an epidural, they can kind of counteract that a little bit, preemptively sort of make sure you're super hydrated, right? But what that also means is that if you've been laboring with nothing, you haven't had any kind of IV connected to you, then you probably have to have that bag of fluids before the epidural is given. So one thing that you can do if you're on the fence, you're in the midst of labor, you're kind of like, I don't know, do I or do I not want an epidural? Am I ready for it or not? Do I want it at all? I'm not sure. Is ask your nurse for that bag of fluids. Say, I'm considering an epidural. I might be ready for an epidural. I want to start that process so that I can kind of get that ball rolling, right? And then those IV fluids can be started. Those take anywhere from like 15 to 45 minutes, depending on how much of those fluids they feel like you need. I've seen some anesthesiologists say, I want that whole bag finished. I've seen some say, as long as fluids are happening, I'm happy to put an epidural in, right? What that does is gives you this little bit of buffer that is going to be there anyway. And it also gives you some hydration. So if you have a little bit of hydration and you're like, actually, I feel amazing, I don't need the epidural, great. Then you can just say no to it. If you feel like after you have that bag of fluids, then you're like, I for sure still want it, then awesome. You're closer to being able to get it. So that's one thing that I think is really helpful to know in terms of context if you're kind of weighing the timing and you're not quite sure you're ready, but you think you might be. So we are going to have a short series of this. So expect maybe 1 or 2 more when questions. And then we're going to start diving into a few postpartum things for the later summer. And so that's what you have to look forward to. Get super excited about that. And then August is all about a new class I have coming. So be excited about that as well. Don't forget to grab your Oxytocin guide that is linked in the show notes or the description if you're over on YouTube. And please do leave a review. That is the best way for people to find this lovely podcast. And if there is something specific about today that you have really loved, I would love to hear that from you. And I would also love to hear what your questions are so that I can review those and answer them for you on the podcast. Until next time, I hope that you have well-educated, consent-filled births.
These episodes are edited and produced by Kaely, Harrod, as I'm sure you can probably tell. And our amazing music is credited in the show notes as well. So we look forward to seeing you on the next episode. And in the meantime, have wonderful and consent-filled births.